Christmas is supposed to be a season of love, warmth, and family. But that night, as the smell of roasted turkey filled my parents' dining room, I overheard something that shattered every illusion I had about them. They weren't talking about holiday plans. They weren't talking about gifts. They were planning my future without me. My parents wanted to move my sister, her husband, and their 3 children into my $350,000 condo. For free. No permission. No discussion. Stay with us. This amazing story will leave you speechless. Before we get started, hit like, share, and subscribe, and drop your location in the comments. Christmas dinner at my parents' house had always been a chaotic blend of noise, laughter, and arguments over who ruined the mashed potatoes. But that year something felt different the moment I walked through the door. Maybe it was the tight way my mother hugged me, or the way my father avoided meeting my eyes, or the smug little smile resting on my sister Claire's face like it had taken up permanent residence. I brushed it off at first. Holidays came with family tensions, and I'd learned to stay quiet, smile politely, and keep the peace. I didn't expect anything unusual, just the usual celebration filled with predictable dysfunction. The dining room glowed under warm yellow lights, reflecting off the silverware my mother only brought out twice a year. The scent of roast turkey and cinnamon butter rolls drifted through the air. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, the position I'd unknowingly mastered ever since childhood. Close enough to help, far enough to be forgotten. Claire and her husband Mark sat proudly in the middle like they were guests of honor. Their 3 kids were already arguing over who got the bigger gingerbread cookie. Normal chaos. Normal noise. Everything seemed ordinary until dessert was served. My parents stepped into the kitchen together, whispering in hushed tones. I wouldn't have heard them if I hadn't gotten up to refill my water. I paused just out of their sight when I heard my name. Not softly, not kindly, but strategically. My mother's voice carried that familiar tone she used when discussing life-changing decisions, as though she were commenting on the weather. "So," she whispered, "once the new year starts, we'll move Claire and the kids into her condo. It's perfect for them." My father grunted approvingly. "Of course. She's single and barely uses the space. Families need room more than individuals." My breath caught in my throat. I froze, gripping the water pitcher until my knuckles whitened. My condo. My $350,000 home. The place I had saved for, fought for, sacrificed for. The place I built alone. And here they were, casually rearranging my life like puzzle pieces they owned. My mother chuckled softly. "We'll tell her after the holidays. She won't mind. She knows Claire is struggling." Claire? Struggling? She and Mark spent more money on vacations than I did on annual bills. And yet, somehow, I was the one expected to surrender everything without question. I stood there, invisible as always, listening while my parents discussed my home as if it belonged to them, as if I belonged to them. They had already decided. They had already planned. They had already taken. And in that moment something inside me shifted forever. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I didn't storm in and demand an explanation the way any sane person probably would have. Instead, I stood completely still, letting their words settle into my chest like cold stones. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away, but my parents kept talking, planning, completely confident in my silence, completely convinced I would obey without resistance. And maybe that was their first mistake, assuming I was still the daughter who swallowed her hurt just to keep the peace. I slowly filled my glass with water, steadying my breathing as if rehearsing for a role. When I walked back to the table, I pasted the same polite smile on my face, the one I'd perfected over years of being overlooked. Claire glanced up at me with that smug grin again, like she was already imagining her family spreading out in my living room, repainting my walls, claiming my space as theirs. Mark gave her a little nudge under the table and they exchanged a knowing look. They weren't just hopeful, they were expecting it. They knew something. They had been told. But I refused to let my face reveal anything. I took my seat, folded my napkin neatly, and continued eating as though my world hadn't just tilted sideways. My parents returned moments later, cheerful, oblivious, masking betrayal under Christmas lights and holiday music. My mother asked if I wanted more stuffing, smiling with the confidence of someone who thinks their decisions will never be questioned. My father poured himself wine, humming contentedly, already mentally moving furniture inside a home that wasn't his. I nodded, answered politely, laughed when everyone else did. But every word out of my mouth was measured. Every breath was controlled. Inside, I was replaying their conversation, dissecting every sentence. She won't mind. Barely uses the space. Families need room more. Each phrase struck like a slap. They weren't just planning, they were dismissing me entirely. Diminishing my independence. Reducing my accomplishments to a spare storage unit for Claire's convenience. Under the table, I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. But on the surface? Pleasant. Completely predictable. Because that was the key, they needed me predictable. They needed me compliant. And I realized something powerful. The moment they believed I wouldn't fight back was the exact moment I knew I would. So I kept my smile. I nodded. I played along. I let them think they still controlled me. Because pretending I didn't hear them was the first move in a game they didn't even know I was playing. The moment dessert was served, the tone in the room shifted. Claire always became bolder after sugar and attention, and tonight was no exception. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine like she was tasting victory instead of Merlot. Mark sat beside her, his chest puffed out with the kind of confidence that only appears when a man thinks he's about to get something expensive for free. "So," Claire said loudly, tapping her fork against her plate for dramatic effect, "I finally told the kids about the move." The word hit me like a slap, but I kept eating my pie. My mother's face lit up. "Oh, how exciting. What did they say?" Claire laughed proudly. "They're thrilled. Emma's already planning how she'll decorate the biggest bedroom. She wants a reading nook and a loft bed." She turned to her daughter. "Isn't that right, sweetheart?" 8-year-old Emma nodded enthusiastically. "And I want pink walls and shelves for my dolls." I smiled kindly at her, even though each word felt like another stitch unraveling in the fabric of my sanity. Mark chimed in next, wiping his mouth with the confidence of someone who hadn't worked hard a single day for what he was about to claim. "Yeah, we'll finally have the space we need. 3 bedrooms, a balcony, a great school district. Honestly, it's perfect for us. Perfect for them. Bought by me." Claire laughed again. "And thank goodness we don't have to rush to buy a house right now. Money's been tight and the market is crazy. This situation is just ideal." That was the word she used to describe taking over my home like it was a spare holiday cottage. I took a sip of water, keeping my hands steady. My parents exchanged approving smiles with Claire and Mark, as though this entire fantasy was logical, reasonable, fair. They didn't even hesitate. It didn't matter to them that I'd worked for years to afford that condo, skipping vacations and living frugally while Claire and Mark bounced from one failed impulse purchase to another. Then Claire dropped the sentence that burned itself into my mind forever. "We're thinking we'll paint the kitchen first. Her style is so plain. It needs some color, maybe a full remodel. Mark wants to tear out that island." Mark nodded aggressively. "Oh, definitely. We'll make the place feel like ours." Ours. I felt something inside me shift. Not break, not crumble, but harden. Their entitlement wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, practiced, and shameless. And they truly believed my condo already belonged to them. As Claire and Mark continued bragging about their future home, my mind drifted, not away from the pain but deeper into it. Because that condo wasn't just a piece of property. It wasn't some investment I stumbled into. It wasn't a gift. It was the result of years of sacrifice, discipline, and choices no one in my family had ever bothered to understand. I remembered the night I signed the papers. I had sat alone in a tiny rented apartment, surrounded by mismatched furniture I'd bought secondhand because every spare dollar had gone into my savings. My friends were out celebrating new jobs and weekend trips, but I was home running spreadsheets, calculating interest rates, and making plans. I worked 2 jobs for nearly 5 years. My full-time office job and a part-time evening position I used to pay off debt faster. While Claire hosted brunches and spa days, I clipped coupons, learned meal prepping, and skipped nights out. No one helped me. No one even asked how I was doing. My parents never praised my independence. They praised Claire's motherhood, Mark's career attempts, and the chaos they created. In their eyes, my success was expected, just another chore I completed without complaint. But I remembered the day I got approved for the loan. My hands shook as I held the phone, barely able to breathe as the bank officer said, "Congratulations. You qualify." I cried real messy tears, because I had done it entirely on my own. The first time I walked into the condo, keys in hand, I felt something I had never felt in my parents' house. Ownership. Control. Freedom. The sun from the balcony windows spilled across the hardwood floors like it was welcoming me into a new life. I painted the walls myself, choosing the exact shade of warm beige that made me feel calm after long days. I refinished the cabinets. I bought furniture slowly, intentionally. No impulse buys, no financial shortcuts. That condo wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of every no I'd ever said to myself so I could finally say yes to something real. So hearing my sister casually announce renovations, talk about ripping apart the kitchen I had saved for, the one I had built piece by piece with my own exhausted hands, it wasn't just insulting. It was erasing me. My family had never once celebrated my hard work. But now they wanted to take the prize at the finish line. They wanted to rewrite the story, make it theirs, like I had simply been keeping the condo warm until Claire was ready to move in. And that, more than anything, was the moment I decided they would never step foot in it again. Growing up, I learned early that in our family, attention wasn't divided equally, it was absorbed entirely by my sister. Claire was the shining star, the delicate one, the one who needed support, reassurance, rescuing. My parents hovered over her like she was made of glass, terrified the world might bruise her. And maybe that would have been understandable if she were actually fragile, but the truth was the opposite. Claire thrived on being catered to. He expected it. He fed off it. Meanwhile, I became the reliable one. The problem solver. The daughter who didn't cause trouble because she wasn't allowed to. If Claire needed something, I was asked to step aside. If Claire wanted something, I was guilted into giving it. "You're the strong one," my mother always said, as if strength was just another word for sacrifice. I remembered birthdays where Claire's extravagant gifts overshadowed my practical ones. I remembered holidays where my accomplishments, good grades, promotions, milestones, were brushed aside because Claire had big news about a new project or a new problem. I remembered being scolded for not being understanding enough when Claire made reckless decisions, while I was given lectures for the smallest mistakes. My childhood, my teenage years, even my adulthood followed this pattern. Claire's needs first. Whenever convenient. When she married Mark, the spotlight doubled. Suddenly, my parents had a son-in-law to praise, grandchildren to spoil, a new storyline to prioritize. I became the background character in my own family narrative. The dependable helper. The babysitter. The designated "can you run this errand" daughter. And I let it happen. Not because I didn't care about myself, but because fighting always felt useless. Whenever I pushed back, I was told I was being selfish, dramatic, or inconsiderate. So I stopped pushing. I built my own life quietly, one responsible choice at a time, believing that one day they would see me, really see me, for who I had become. But that moment never came. The older I got, the more invisible I felt. Phone calls from my parents centered around Claire's struggles, Claire's needs, Claire's finances. They barely asked about my life. And when they did, their concern felt mechanical, like a script they had memorized but didn't understand. So when I overheard them talking about moving Claire into my condo, my biggest personal achievement, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the natural result of years of being treated as second place. The expectation wasn't new, but the assumption that I would give up my home without question. That cut deeper than anything they had done before. It wasn't just about the condo. It was about the realization that in their eyes, I had always been disposable. 2 days after Christmas, when the world was still glowing with leftover holiday cheer, I woke up to a string of notifications on my phone. At first, I thought they were the usual family group chat messages. Pictures of leftovers, videos of the kids opening presents. But as I scrolled, my stomach twisted. Claire had posted photos on her social media. Photos of cardboard boxes stacked neatly in a hallway. Photos of folded clothes. Photos of labeled bins that read, "bathroom, condo." And the caption? "Getting ready for our big move. Can't wait to start fresh in our new home, red heart." Home. My hands went cold. I stared at the screen, rereading the caption over and over, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't even spoken to them since Christmas. And yet, judging by Claire's cheerful updates, the decision had been finalized without a single word from me. A moment later, another picture appeared. My mother, smiling proudly as she packed Claire's dishes into a box. The caption under that one read, "Helping my girl get ready. So excited for her." Excited. My mother was excited. For my sister to move into my condo. A home I hadn't offered. A home they hadn't asked for. A home they were treating like an inheritance rather than something I worked for. Before I could even process the rage bubbling in my chest, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my father. Make sure you start clearing out the guest room before the weekend. We'll bring the kids' beds over on Sunday. Just like that. A demand. Not a discussion, not a question, an instruction. I typed out a dozen responses. No one is moving into my condo. You have no right. Stop this immediately. But each message ended up deleted. Not because I was scared, but because I knew I needed them to dig their own grave a little deeper. Let them assume I was compliant. Let them think I was the same quiet daughter who never fought back. Let them prepare for a move that would never happen. By the afternoon, Claire posted yet another picture. This one of my condo's exterior. She'd driven by, taken a photo of the building and proudly written, "Can't wait to call this place home." Home. The word echoed inside my skull until it became unbearable. That was the moment something snapped. Not a breakdown, no. A clarity. A sharp, cold understanding that my family didn't just overlook me. They didn't value me at all. And if they couldn't see my worth willingly, then they were about to learn it the hard way. That evening I stood in my living room, staring at the soft glow of my condo's lights reflecting on the floor I had polished with my own hands. This place, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like the center of a storm only I could see coming. Yet instead of panic, I felt something else rising inside me. Something steady, controlled, and strangely empowering. A smile. A quiet, small smile that came from knowing something no one else knew. My parents believed my silence meant surrender. Claire believed her entitlement guaranteed victory. Mark believed he'd cleverly secured a new home without lifting a finger. But I knew something they didn't. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't cornered. I wasn't trapped. Their assumption that I would roll over was their greatest miscalculation. I sat down on my couch, pulled my laptop onto my lap, and opened a blank document. Not to write a rant or a message or a warning. No, I was drafting a plan. A very simple, very effective one. I didn't need to argue with them. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to defend myself for wanting to keep something I had earned. What I needed was strategy. Because people like my family, people who build their lives around taking advantage of the responsible one, never expect the responsible one to take back control. They expect submission. Quiet obedience. Compliance smothered under guilt and obligation. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. Not after hearing them claim my home as if I were just a placeholder in their lives. So I mapped out every detail. When to make calls. Who to contact. What documents to gather. How to prepare without leaving a trace. Every line I typed was a reclaiming of my power. Every step was a quiet rebellion wrapped in calmness. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, not with anger but with purpose. Because revenge fueled by rage burns quickly. But revenge fueled by clarity burns slowly, and leaves lasting marks. Later that night my phone buzzed repeatedly. My mother asking if I could measure the kids' room for curtains. Claire sending paint samples for her new office. Mark asking if I could be home Sunday so they could start moving small items. I read every message with the same quiet smile. I didn't reply. Not yet. Responding would give them power. Silence kept the power mine. And as the messages piled up, as their delusion grew, as their entitlement spilled over into confidence, I simply closed my laptop and sat back, letting the satisfaction settle in my chest. This wasn't fear. This was preparation. They thought they knew me. They thought they owned the narrative. But they were about to learn. The daughter they overlooked was done being quiet. The next morning I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My silence had protected me long enough. Now it was time for action. If my family believed they could take my home from me, then they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Not through a dramatic confrontation. Not through shouting matches or emotional pleas. Through paperwork. Through signatures. Through a decision they had no power to undo. I sat at my dining table, the same place where I had spent countless evenings budgeting and planning. I opened my laptop and searched for a realtor. Someone experienced, discreet, and fast. The first name that caught my attention belonged to a woman with glowing reviews, praising her ability to close deals quickly and quietly. Exactly what I needed. I dialed her number, half expecting guilt to creep up on me. But it didn't. Instead, I felt relief. "Hello, this is Marlene," she answered warmly. "Hi," I replied, steady and confident. "I'm considering selling my condo. I'd like an evaluation as soon as possible. I need discretion." There was a brief pause, then a knowing laugh. "Honey, discretion is my specialty. I can be there in an hour." Perfect. I spent those 60 minutes packing a few personal items, documents, sentimental things, anything that could reveal my plans prematurely. By the time Marlene knocked on my door, I had already cleared enough space to make the condo look ready for professional eyes. The moment she walked in, her eyebrows shot up. "This is beautiful," she said. "Units like this? They don't stay on the market long." "Good," I replied. "I don't want it to." We walked room by room as she took notes, nodding in approval at every corner. "Clean, modern, great natural light. You've taken amazing care of this place. When would you like to list it?" "As soon as possible," I said. "Preferably before the end of the week." She smiled. "I can make that happen." As she left, promising to send paperwork within the hour, I felt something shift inside me. For years, my family had dictated my decisions. Subtly, emotionally, manipulatively. But this choice? This was mine alone, untouched by guilt or obligation. When I checked my phone afterward, I saw more messages from my mother and Claire. Photos of furniture they planned to bring. Chatter about where the kids' toys would go. My father had even texted a reminder. "Don't forget to clear the master closet for Claire." I looked at the message and laughed. They were decorating a home that was already halfway out of their reach. 3 days after meeting with the realtor, I got the call I knew was coming. Not from Marlene. She had already sent me the paperwork, already arranged the photos, already prepared the listing. No, this call came from my mother, whose voice always carried that familiar tone. Half sweetness, half authority, as if she were calling a child instead of a grown woman with a mortgage and a full-time job. "Honey," she began, "we've been talking and we've decided it's best to move Claire and the kids into your condo next week." Decided. We've decided. They didn't even try to disguise it as a conversation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as her words echoed in my ears. Next week. They were accelerating their imaginary plan, moving with the urgency of people trying to claim something before someone changed their mind. Mine? Next week. I repeated calmly, masking the amusement curling in my chest. "Yes," my mother said with the cheerfulness of someone announcing a holiday sale. "Your father and I cleared our schedules. We'll help them move everything. And we found the cutest bunk bed online. It'll go perfectly in the guest room." The guest room that would soon belong to a complete stranger, not Claire's children. I didn't respond immediately. I let silence sit there, long enough for her to grow nervous. "Honey, are you there?" "I'm here," I said softly. "Just listening." She took that as acceptance, of course. They always did. Then she added, with her classic mix of guilt and manipulation, "This is for the family. You understand that, right? Claire needs support. You don't have kids. You don't need the space the way she does." There was the excuse, the justification, the belief that my life mattered less because it didn't look like hers. Before I could reply, I heard noise in the background, loud chatter, laughter, the sound of kids running around. Then Claire grabbed the phone. "Hey," she said in that overly cheerful voice she used when she wanted something. "Mom told you the great news, right? We're so excited. Mark's already measuring furniture. We'll swing by this weekend to start moving the small stuff." Swing by. Start moving things. Into a home they assumed was already theirs. My father's voice cut through next, as if this were a group celebration. "It's settled. We'll be there Sunday morning with the truck." Not a single question. Not a moment of hesitation. Not even the courtesy of asking permission for the home I paid for. I smiled, a slow, calm smile they couldn't see. "Well," I said gently, "I think next week is going to be very educational." They didn't catch the tone. They didn't hear the warning. All they heard was the quiet daughter they believed they controlled. And that made what came next even sweeter. The listing for my condo went live on a Tuesday morning. By noon, Marlene had already forwarded 3 inquiries. By evening, she sent a 4th message, this time with a smiley face. "You'll have offers tomorrow." I stared at the text, feeling a strange blend of pride and disbelief. My family was somewhere making plans for paint swatches and bunk beds, while complete strangers were preparing offers for the home Claire believed she was entitled to. The universe has a dark sense of humor sometimes, and that week it was working overtime. On Wednesday afternoon, Marlene called. "I hope you're sitting down," she said. "I am," I replied, though I was standing in my kitchen watching the sunlight spill across the floor I would soon say goodbye to. "We have a full price offer. And they want to close quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. 3 days. 3 days. While my parents were planning a move-in date, the condo was already halfway sold. I felt a rush of emotion, not sadness but a sharp, satisfying clarity. The pieces were falling into place, each one fitting perfectly into the quiet strategy I'd built. I accepted the offer immediately. Then came the whirlwind. Paperwork, signatures, final inspections, bank approvals. A blur of logistics that moved faster than my family's entitlement could catch up with. Every time I initialed a page, every time I signed my name, it felt like reclaiming another piece of my autonomy. By Friday morning, the condo was no longer mine. Legally, officially, completely gone. I stood inside the empty living room, feeling the silence echo around me. The new buyers would move in soon, and I had to be out within hours. My belongings were already packed neatly into boxes, stacked by the door. I had prepared everything long before the sale even began. I took one last walk through the condo. The balcony where I drank coffee during quiet mornings. The kitchen I painstakingly remodeled by hand. The hallway where I used to track my budget spreadsheets with sticky notes. Memories of discipline, sacrifice, and independence filled the space, but there was no ache. No regret. Just a calm understanding that this home had served its purpose, and now it was time to move forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "We're coming Sunday. Can you make sure the kids' room is cleared?" Smiley face. My mother sent another message moments later. "Don't forget to sort your things. We'll help rearrange when we get there." I stared at the screen, then at the freshly sold condo. The keys in my hand felt heavier than ever. They were preparing to move into a home that didn't belong to me anymore, and certainly would never belong to them. I locked the door behind me and walked away with a smile. By Saturday morning, the condo no longer resembled my life. It was simply a clean, empty space waiting for its new owners. Sunlight streamed across bare floors where my furniture once stood, casting long shadows that felt more like closure than loss. Every box I taped shut, every drawer I emptied, every echoing footstep reminded me. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something better. My move was quiet, strategic. Just like everything else in the plan. I had rented a small but beautiful place in a neighboring city, far enough to create distance but close enough to keep my job until I decided my next step. The apartment wasn't as large as the condo, but it felt right. Untouched by my family's expectations. A blank page waiting for a story that belonged to me and me alone. I loaded the last few items into the trunk of my car. My laptop, a few sentimental decorations, the one plant I'd somehow managed not to kill, and took a slow breath. There was no sadness. No grief. Only release. My parents expected me to spend the weekend preparing their home. Claire expected to arrive to a condo still warm with my presence. Mark expected an easy, smooth transition into a life he hadn't earned. But I didn't owe them a single explanation. Before leaving, I placed a small envelope on the kitchen counter. Not for them, but for the real estate agent handling the final handoff. A simple thank you note. A gesture of appreciation for someone who, without realizing it, had helped me sever the last thread of obligation tying me to the family who couldn't see my value. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. My footsteps echoed down the hallway as if the building itself knew something monumental had just happened. I reached the parking lot, opened my car door and paused. My phone buzzed again. More messages. "Claire. Just checking. Can you have the keys ready tomorrow morning?" My father. "Don't forget we're bringing the mattresses. Please clear space." My mother. "Make sure the pantry is empty. Claire needs to stock food for the kids." All 3 messages stacked in a row like demands from landlords instead of family. I let the screen go dark. They didn't deserve a reply. Not now. Not yet. I started the engine and pulled onto the road, watching the condo complex shrink in my rearview mirror. No tears came, No second thoughts. Just the steady realization that for the first time in my life I was choosing myself. Quietly, unapologetically, completely. They would come tomorrow. They would find an empty condo. And they would finally understand that the daughter they underestimated had outgrown the role they forced her into. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold, the kind of winter day where the air stings your lungs. I imagine my parents loading their SUV with forced cheer, Claire barking orders while Mark struggled with boxes he'd probably packed sloppily. They were likely buzzing with excitement, believing they were on the cusp of a fresh chapter in my home. Meanwhile, I sat in my new apartment sipping coffee in absolute peace. Around 9:12 a.m. the first call came. My mother. I didn't answer. 9 minutes later my sister called. Then my father. Then Claire again. By the time the clock hit 10, my phone was vibrating non-stop on the table like a trapped insect. I knew exactly what was happening, almost as if I were standing beside them, witnessing every second of the unraveling. They probably approached the building with pride, kids bouncing with excitement, Mark carrying a taped-up box labeled toys. Claire would have been narrating their future like a real estate agent on a sugar high. What they found instead was a reality that slapped them across the face. The condo door, locked. The unit, empty. The entire place, unrecognizable. The sold sign, removed only after closing, had left faint tape marks on the inside of the window. My parents would have noticed those immediately. I pictured my father trying the handle repeatedly, confused and growing irritated. Claire frowning at the locked door she believed she had access to. My mother checking her messages, insisting I must be running late. But then someone, probably Mark, would have cupped his hands against the window and peered inside. Nothing. No furniture. No boxes. No life. Just bare floors and blank walls. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Claire. Where is everything? Another followed before I could even set the phone down. Why is the condo empty? Why is there no furniture? Then from my mother. Honey, please call us. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word almost made me laugh. Next came my father, far less composed. What the hell is going on? Why is the condo sold? We need to talk now. As if an explanation would magically restore the ownership they never had. 10 minutes passed before the messages changed tone entirely, from confusion, to panic, to disbelief. Claire again. Tell me you didn't sell it. Please tell me you didn't. Then seconds later. You ruined everything. How could you do this on purpose? On purpose. As if selling my own property required their permission. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the moment sink in. This wasn't chaos for me. This was peace. For the first time ever, my family was being forced to face a truth they had spent years ignoring. I wasn't their backup plan. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their doormat. And I wasn't theirs to control. By noon my phone looked like it was having a nervous breakdown. Notifications filled the entire screen. One after another, non-stop. When I glanced at the call log, the number at the top nearly made me laugh out loud. 78 missed calls. 78 attempts to reach me. 78 moments of panic, confusion, and dawning realization. I didn't reply to a single one. My mother tried the polite route first. Sweetheart, we're here at the condo. Please call us. Something is not right. Then came Claire, whose messages had escalated from confusion, to disbelief, to pure emotional theatrics. What is going on? Why is everything gone? This has to be a mistake. Tell me this is a mistake. Answer me. Mark chimed in too, his tone shifting between fake calm and poorly disguised frustration. We need to sort this out. You should have communicated better. This is causing a huge inconvenience. An inconvenience. The entitlement in the word almost shimmered. But the award for the most dramatic shift belonged to my father. At first he tried authority. You need to call us immediately. This isn't funny. You have responsibilities to your family. But when authority failed, he turned to guilt. That was always his fallback move. We are your parents. You're hurting your mother. Family comes first. Except in their version of family, I had never been seen as a member, only as a resource. The more messages they sent, the clearer their panic became. My parents weren't just confused, they were embarrassed. They had shown up with a moving truck. They had told neighbors, friends, Probably even boasted about how lucky Claire was. No. Their grand plan had crumbled in front of an empty unit they had never owned. Around 1:30 p.m. the messages shifted again, this time into desperation. From my mother. Honey, please. We don't understand. Why would you do something so drastic without telling us? Drastic? Selling my own home was drastic? But then moving another family into it without permission was reasonable? Then Claire sent a message I reread twice just to appreciate the irony. You blindsided us. You should have told us you were thinking of selling. We made plans. Plans built on property they weren't entitled to. The last message came from my father, the most frantic one yet. We need to talk. Now. Your mother is extremely upset. You had no right to do this behind our backs. Behind their backs. As if the condo belonged to all of us, and I had committed some crime by exercising the only right that was actually mine. I put my phone down, letting silence be my answer. Their panic didn't intimidate me. It validated me. For once they were the ones scrambling. For once they were the ones powerless. And for the first time in my life, my boundaries were finally being felt. By late afternoon, the chaos had simmered into a low, frantic buzz. My phone still lit up every few minutes, but the initial panic had softened into exhaustion. They weren't just angry anymore. They were bewildered. Hurt. Completely unprepared for the reality they found themselves in. That was when I decided it was time. Not to explain. Not to apologize. But to clarify. I waited for Claire's next call. It didn't take long. When her name flashed across the screen for the 20th time that hour, I finally pressed answer. She didn't even say hello. What is wrong with you? She screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone from my ear. The condo is empty. There's a sold sticker on the mailbox. The realtor here said it closed on Friday. You sold it. Without telling any of us. I let her tirade echo into the room before responding, my voice calm and steady. Correct. I sold it. Silence. A stunned, incredulous silence. You sold it, she repeated slowly as if the words themselves were malfunctioning. Yes. But why? She demanded. We had plans. We were supposed to move in today. You had plans, I corrected. I didn't. Before she could explode again, I heard my mother grab the phone. Honey, she said in a trembling voice that was meant to invoke guilt. You blindsided us. You knew we were preparing to move Claire in. You should have talked to us. We're your family. I took a breath, steady and unwavering. You planned to move my sister's family into my home without asking me. You talked about it behind my back. You even started packing. So no, communication wasn't the problem. Respect was. My mother sputtered. We thought you wouldn't mind. You live alone, you don't need all that space. Claire has children. And that still doesn't entitle anyone to my property, I cut in. You don't get to make decisions about my home. Ever. I heard movement, then my father's voice thundered through the phone. You embarrassed us, he snapped. We showed up with a moving truck. Do you have any idea how insane that makes us look? I almost laughed at the irony. You embarrassed yourselves, I said plainly. You assumed ownership over something that was never yours. He growled in frustration. You should have told us you were selling. You should have asked before planning to take it, I replied. Another silence followed, this one heavier, sharper. Claire finally burst back onto the line. So what are we supposed to do now? We need a place to live. That sounds like a problem you should have considered before counting on something you never had. My voice stayed calm. Measured. Untouchable. No one is entitled to my life, I finished. And definitely not to my home. Before anyone could fire back, I ended the call. They had finally heard me. Not the quiet, obedient daughter, but the woman who owned her choices. After the confrontation call, my apartment felt unusually quiet. Not empty but peaceful. The kind of peace that comes only after you finally stop carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. I sat by the window watching cars pass below, the city lights flickering like tiny beacons of freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing myself for someone else's disappointment. I wasn't shrinking to make others comfortable. I wasn't giving pieces of myself away just to maintain a family dynamic built on imbalance. I was simply still. And it felt powerful. Over the next few days, my family tried different tactics. My mother sent long messages dripping with guilt, how family should stay united, how this was all a misunderstanding, how she didn't know I felt so strongly. She didn't apologize, of course. She didn't acknowledge the entitlement or manipulation. Just guilt wrapped in motherly concern. My father tried taking the logical route, explaining how chaotic the situation was for Claire and the kids, how my decision had real consequences, as if their choices hadn't been the trigger. He insisted I owe them a conversation, but for once I didn't feel obligated to fix chaos I didn't create. But Claire bounced between rage and pleading. One minute she was calling me selfish, dramatic, cruel. The next she was begging me to reconsider, insisting they really needed that condo, that this was supposed to be our fresh start. But it wasn't my job to provide her a fresh start. Especially not at the cost of my own stability. Eventually the messages slowed. Then stopped. Not because they understood, but because they finally realized something they'd never recognized before. I wasn't stepping back into my old role. I had outgrown it. I had outgrown them in many ways. In my new apartment I began rebuilding a life without the pressure of appeasing people who never valued my boundaries. I decorated at my own pace. Plants on the windowsill, cozy blankets, a small bookshelf that felt like an altar to freedom. Every purchase, every placement felt intentional, like I was reclaiming space inside myself as I shaped the space around me. One evening, while sipping tea on my balcony, the realization settled over me like warm sunlight. My family's disappointment was not my responsibility. Their expectations were not my obligations. Their chaos was not my burden. Selling the condo wasn't revenge. It was liberation. And in choosing myself, quietly, firmly, unapologetically, I had taught them a lesson no argument ever could. The daughter they underestimated was finally living a life that belonged to her.